Welcome to the 1000 Nights and 1 Night. Now, when it was the 669th night, she said, "It hath reached me, O auspicious king, that when the two hosts drew apart, every one went to his tent until morning. As soon as it was day, the two hosts mounted their strong steeds, and levelled their lances, and wore their harnesses of war, when they raised their slogan cries, and drew out in battle array, whilst came forth all the lordly knights and the lions of fight. Now, the first to open the gate of battle was Rustam, who urged his charger into midfield and cried out, 'God is most great. I am Rustam, champion and chief of the Arabs and Ajams. Who is for tilting? Who is for fighting? Let no sluggard come at me this day, or weakling.' Then there rushed forth to him a champion of Persians. The two charged at each other, and there befell between them a sore fight, till Rustam sprang upon his adversary, and smote him with a mace he had with him, 70 pounds in weight, and beat his head down upon his breast, and he fell to the earth, dead, and in his blood drowned. There was no light matter to Sabur, and he commanded his men to charge, so they drave at the Moslems, invoking the aid of the light-giving sun, whilst the true believers called for help from the magnanimous king. But the Ajams, the miscreants, outnumbered the Arabs, the Moslems, and made them drain the cup of death, which when Gharib saw, he drew his sword al-Mahik, and crying out his war cry, fell upon the Persians with Kalajan and Kurajan at either stirrup. Nor did he leave playing upon them with blade, till he hewed his way to the standard bearer, and smote him on the head with the flat of his sword, whereupon he fell down in fainting fit, and the two Marids bore him off to their camp. When the Persians saw the standard fall, they turned and fled, and for the city gates made. But the Moslems followed them with the blade, and they crowded together to enter the city, so that they could not shut the gates, and there died of them much people. Then Rustam and Sadan, Jarmkhan, and Sahim, al-Damai, Kalajan and Kurajan, and all the brave Mohammedan and the champions of faith, Unitarian, fell upon the misbelieving Persians in the gates, and the blood of the Kafirs ran in the streets like a torrent, till they drew down their arms and harnesses, and called out for quarter, whereupon the Moslems stayed their swords from the slaughter, and drove them to their tents, as one driveth a flock of sheep. Meanwhile, Gharib returned to his pavilion, where he doffed his gear and washed himself of the blood of the infidels. After which he donned his royal robes and sat down on his chair of estate. Then he called for the king of the Persians and said to him, "O dog of the Ajams, what moved thee to deal thus with thy daughter? How seest thou me unworthy to be her baron?" And Sabur answered, saying, "O king, punish me not because of that deed which I did, for I repent me, and confronted thee not in fight, but in my fear of thee." When Gharib heard these words, he bade throw him flat and beat him. So they bastioned him till he could no longer groan, and cast him among the prisoners. Then Gharib expounded all Islam to the Persians, and 120,000 of them embraced the faith, and the rest he put to the sword. Moreover, all the citizens professed all Islam, and Gharib mounted and entered in great state the city Isbanir al-Madin. Then he went into the king's palace, and sitting down on Sabur's throne, gave robes and largesse, and distributed the booty and treasure among the Arabs and Persians, wherefore they loved him, and wished him victory and honor and endurance of days. But Fakir Taj's mother remembered her daughter, and raised the voice of mourning for her, and the palace was filled with wails and cries. Gharib heard this, and entering the harem, asked the woman what ailed them, whereupon the princess's mother came forward and said, "O my lord, thy presence put me in mind of my daughter, and how she would have joyed in thy coming, had she been alive and well." Gharib wept for her, and sitting down on his throne, called for Sabur, and they brought him stumbling in his shackles. Quoth Gharib to him, "O dog of the Persians, what didst thou do with thy daughter?" "I gave her to such an one and such an one," quoth the king, saying, "Drown her in the river Jann." So Gharib sent for the 2 men, and asked them, Is what he saith true? Answered they, Yes. But, O king, we did not drown her, nay, we took pity on her, and left her on the banks of Jann, saying, Save thyself, and return not to the city, lest the king slay thee, and slay us with thee. This is all we know of her. And Shahrazad perceived the dawn of the day, and ceased to say her permitted say. Now, when it was the 670th night, she continued, It hath reached me, O auspicious king, that the 2 men ended the tale of Fakir Taj with these words, And we left her upon the bank of the river Jann. Now, when Gharib heard this, he bade bring the astrologers, and said to them, Strike me a board of geomancy, and find out what is come of Fakir Taj, and whether she is still in the bonds of life or dead. They did so, and said, O king of the age, it is manifest to us that the princess is alive, and hath borne a male child. But she is with the tribe of the Jinn, and will be parted from thee 20 years. Count, therefore, how many years thou hast been absent in travel. So he reckoned up the years, and found them 8 years, and said, There is no majesty, and there is no might, save in Allah, the glorious, the great. Then he sent for all Sabor's governors of towns and strongholds, and they came and did homage. Now, one day after this, as he sat in his palace, behold, a cloud of dust appeared in the distance, and spread till it walled the whole land, and darkened the horizon. So he summoned the 2 Marids, and bade them do reconnaissance, and they went forth under the dust cloud, and snatching up a horseman of the advancing host, returned and set him down before Gharib, saying, Ask this fellow for who he is of the army. Quoth Gharib, Whose power is this? And the man answered, O king, 'tis the army of Kahid Shah, king of Siras, who is come forth to fight thee. Now the cause of Karad Shah's coming was this. When Gharib defeated Sabor's army, he hath been related, and took him prisoner. The king's son fled with a handful of his father's forces, and ceased not flying till he reached the city of Shiraz, where he went into King Karad Shah, and kissed ground before him, whilst the tears ran down his cheek. When the king saw him in this case, he said to him, Lift thy head, O youth, and tell me, what maketh thee weep? He replied, O king, a king of the Arabs by name Gharib hath fallen on us, and captured the king my sire, and slain the Persians, making them drain the cup of death. And he told him all that had passed from first to last. Quoth Karad Shah, Is my wife well? And quoth the prince, Gharib hath taken her. Cried the king, As my head liveth, I will not leave a Badawi or a Moslem on the face of the earth. So he wrote letters to the viceroys, who levied their troops, and joined him with an army, which when they received numbered 85,000 men. Then he opened his armories, and distributed arms and armor to the troops, after which he set out with them, and journeyed till he came to Ispanir, and all encamped before the city gate. Hereupon Kaylajan and Kurajan came in to Gharib, kissing his knee, and said to him, O our lord, heal our hearts, and give us this host to our share. And he said, Up and at them. So the 2 Marids flew aloft high in the lift, and lighted down in the pavilion of the king Shahars, founded him seated on his seat of estate, with the prince of Persia, Ward Shah, son of Sabor, sitting on his right hand, and about his captains, with whom he was taking counsel for the slaughter of the Moslems. Kaylajan came forward, and caught up the prince and Kurajan, and snatched up the king and the twain, and flew back with them to Gharib, who beat them till they fainted. Then the Marids returned to the Shirazan camp, and drawing their swords, which no mortal man had strength to wield, fell upon the misbelievers, and Allah hurried their souls to the fire, an abiding place dire, whilst they saw no one, and nothing save 2 swords flashing, and reaping men as husbandmen reap corn. So they left their tents, and mounting their horses, barebacked fled, and the Marids pursued them 2 days, and slew of them much people, after which they returned and kissed Gharib's hand. He thanked them for their deeds that they had done, and said to them, The spoil of the infidels is yours alone. None shall share with you therein. So they called down blessings on him, and going forth, gathered the booty together, and abode in their homes. On this wise it was fared with them. But as regards Gharib and his lieges, Well, Shahrazad perceived the dawn of the day and ceased to say her permitted say. Now, when it was the 671st night, she resumed, It hath reached me, O auspicious king, that after Gharib had put to flight the hosts of Khirad Shah, he bade Kaylashan and Khurajan take the spoil to their own possession, nor share it with any. So they gathered the booty and abode in their own homes. Meanwhile, the remains of the beaten force ceased not flying till they reached the city of Shiraz, and there lifted up the voice of weeping, and began the ceremonial lamentations for those of them that had been slain. Now King Khirad Shah had a brother Siran the sorcerer hight, than whom there was no greater wizard in this day, and he lived apart from his brother in a certain stronghold called Fortalice of Fruits, in a place abounding in trees and streams and birds and blooms, half a day journey from Shiraz. So the fugitives betook them thither, and went into Siran the sorcerer, weeping and wailing aloud. Quoth he, O folk, what gareth you to weep? And they told him all that had happened, especially how the two Marids had carried off his brother Khirad Shah, whereupon the light of his eyes became night, and he said, By the virtue of my faith, I will certainly slay Gharib and all his men, and certainly leave not anyone alive to tell the tale. Then he pronounced certain magical words, and summoned the Red King, who appeared, and Siran said to him, Fare for Ispanir, and fall on Gharib as he sitteth upon his throne. Replied he, Hearkening and obedience. And gathering his troops, repaired to Ispanir, and assailed Gharib, who, seeing him, drew his sword al-Mahik, and he and Kaylajan and Khurajan fell upon the army of the Red King, and slew of them 530, and wounded the king himself with a grievous wound, whereupon he and his people fled, and stayed not on their flight, till they reached the Fortalice of Fruits, and went into Siran, crying out and exclaiming, Woe and ruin! And the Red King said to Siran, O sage, Gharib hath with him the enchanted sword of Japhet, son of Noah, and whomsoever he smiteth therewith he severeth him in sunder. And with him also are two Marids from Mount Caucasus, given to him by King Murash. He it is who slew the Blue King and Barkhan, lord of Cornelian city, and did to death much people of the Jinn. When the enchanter heard this, he went to the Red King. Go. And he went his way. Whereupon he resumed his conjurations, and calling up a Marid by the name of Zuzia, gave him a drachm of levigated bang, and said to him, Go thou at Ispanir, and enter King Gharib's palace, and assume the form of a sparrow. Wait till he fall, and there be none with him. Then put the bang up his nostrils, and bring him to me. To hear is to obey, replied the Marid, and flew to Ispanir, where, changing himself to a sparrow, he perched on the window of the palace, and waited till all of Gharib's attendants retired to their rooms, and the king himself was asleep. Then he flew down, and going up to Gharib, blew the powdered bang into his nostrils, till he lost all his senses. Whereupon he wrapped him up in the bed coverlet, and flew off with him like the storm wind to the Fortalice of Fruit, where he arrived at midnight, and laid his prize before Siran. The sorcerer thanked him, and would have put Gharib to death as he lay senseless under bang, but a man of his people withheld him, saying, O sage, an thou slay him, his friend King Murash will fall on us with all his ifrits, and lay waste our realm. How then shall we do with him? asked Siran. And the other answered, Cast him into the Jehan, while he is still in bang, and he shall be drowned, and none will know who threw him in. And Siran bade the Marid take Gharib, and cast him into Jehan river. And Shahrazad perceived the dawn of the day, and ceased saying her permitted say. Now, when it was the 672nd night, she resumed, It hath reached me, O auspicious king, that the Marid took Gharib and carried him to the Jehan, proposing to cast him therein, but it was grievous to him to drown him, wherefore he made a raft of wood, and binding it with cords, pushed it out, and Gharib thereon into the current, which carried it away. Thus fared it with Gharib, But as regards his people, when they awoke in the morning and went in to do their service to their king, they found him not, and seeing his rosary on the throne, awaited him a while, but he came not. So they sought out the head chamberlain and said to him, Go into the harem and look for the king, for it is not his habit to tarry till this time. Accordingly, the chamberlain entered the seraglio and inquired for the king, but the woman said, Since yesterday we have not seen him. Thereupon he returned and told the officers, who were confounded, and said, Let us see if he has gone into the pleasures of the garden. Then they went out and questioned the gardeners if they had seen the king, and they answered no. Whereat they were sore concerned, and searched all the gardens till the end of the day, when they returned in tears. Moreover, the two Murids sought for him all around the city, but came back after 3 days without having happened any tidings of him. So the people donned black and made their complaint to the Lord of all worshipping men, who doth as he is fain. Meanwhile, while the current bore the raft along the 5 days, till it brought him to the salt sea, where the waves disported with Gharib, and his stomach being troubled, threw up the bang. Then he opened his eyes, and finding himself in the midst of the main, a plaything of the billows, said, There is no majesty and there is no might, save in Allah, the glorious, the great. Would to heaven I wot who hath done this deed to me. Presently, as he lay perplexed concerning his case, lo, he caught sight of a ship sailing by, and signalled with his sleeve to the sailors, who came to him and took him, and saying, Who art thou, and whence comest thou? He replied, Do ye feed me and give me drink till I recover myself, and after I will tell you who I am. So they brought him water and victuals, and he ate and he drank, and Allah restored him to his reason. Then he asked them, O folk, what country are ye, and of what faith? And they answered, We are from Karaj, and we worship an idol called Minkash. Cried Gharib, Perdition to you and your idol! O dogs, none is worthy of worship save Allah, who created all things, who saith to a thing, Be, and it becometh. When they heard this, they rose up and fell upon him in great wrath, and would have seized him. Now he was without weapons, but whomsoever he struck, he smote down and deprived him of his life, till he had felled 40 men. After which they overcame him by force of numbers, and bound him fast, saying, We will not slay him, save in our own land, that we may first show him to our king. Then they sailed on till they came to the city of Karaj, and Shahrazad perceived the dawn of the day, and ceased saying her permitted say. Now, when it was the 673rd night, she pursued, It hath reached me, O auspicious king, that when the ship's crew seized Gharib and bound him fast, I said, We will not save him, save in our own land. Then they sailed on till they came to the city of Karaj, the builder whereof was an Amalekite, fierce and furious, and he had set up at each gate of the city a magical figure of copper, which, when a stranger entered, blew a blast on a trumpet, that all in the city heard it, and fell upon the stranger and slew him, except they embraced their creed. When Gharib entered the city, the figure stationed at the gate blew such a horrible blast that the king was affrighted, and going into his idol found fire and smoke issuing from its mouth, its nose, and its eyes. Now a Satan had entered the belly of the idol, and speaking as with a tongue said, O king, there is come to thy city one hight, Gharib, king of all Iraq, who biddeth the folk quit their belief and worship his Lord. Wherefore, when they bring him before thee, look thou not spare him. So the king went out and sat down on his throne, and presently the sailors brought in Gharib and set him before the presence, saying, O king, we found this youth shipwrecked in the midst of the sea, and he is a Kafir, and believeth not in our gods. Then they told him all that had passed, and the king said, Carry him to the house of the great idol, and cut his throat before him, so haply our God may look lovingly upon us. But the wazir said, O king, it befitteth not to slaughter him thus, for he would die in a moment. Better we imprison him, and build a pyre of fuel, and burn him with fire. Thereupon the king commanded to cast Gharib into the hole, and caused wood to be brought, and that they might create a mighty pyre, and set fire to it, and it burnt till the morning. Then the king and the people of the city came forth, and the ruler sent to fetch Gharib, but his lieges found him not. So they returned and told their king, who said, "And how made he his escape?" Quoth they, "We found the chains and shackles cast down, and the doors fast locked." Whereat the king marveled and asked, "Hath this fellow to heaven upflown, or into the earth gone down?" And they answered, "We know not." Then said the king, "I will go and question my God, and he will inform me whither he is gone." So he rose, and he went in to prostrate himself to this idol, but found it not, and began to rub his eyes, and said, "Am I in sleep, or on wake?" And then he turned to his wazir, and said to him, "Where is my God? And where is my prisoner? By my faith, O dog of wazirs, hadst thou not counseled me to burn him, I had slaughtered him. For it is he who hath stolen my God and fled, and there is no hope but I take blood wreak of him." Then he drew his sword and struck off the wazir's head. Now there was for Gharib's escape with the idol a strange cause, and it was on this wise. When they had shut him up in a cell adjoining the doomed shrine under which stood the idol, he rose to pray, calling upon the name of Almighty Allah, and seeking deliverance of him, to whom be honor and glory. The Murid, who had charge of the idol and spoke in its name, heard him, and fear got hold upon his heart, and he said, "O shame upon me! Who is this seeth me while I see him not?" So he went in to Gharib, and throwing himself at his feet, said to him, "O my lord, what must I say that I may become of thy company into thy religion?" Replied Gharib, "Say, there is no God but the God, and Abraham is the friend of God." So the Murid pronounced the profession of faith, and was enrolled among the people of felicity. Now his name was Zazel, son of Al-Muzazzil, one of the chiefs of the kings of the Jinn. Then he unbound Gharib, and taking him an idol, made for the huge and higher air. And Shahrazad perceived the dawn of the day, and ceased to say her permitted say. Now, when it was the 674th night, she said, "It hath reached me, O auspicious king, that the Murid took up Gharib and the idol, and made for the higher air." Such was his case. But as regards the king, when his soldiers saw what had befallen, and the slaughter of the wazir, they renounced the worship of the idol, and drawing their swords slew the king. After which they fell on one another, and the sword went round amongst them 3 days, till there abode alive but 2 men, one of whom prevailed over the other and killed him. Then the boys attacked the survivor, and slew him, and fell to fighting amongst themselves, till they were all killed. And the women and the children, they fled to the hamlets and forded villages, wherefore the city became a desert, and none dwelt therein but the owl. Meanwhile, Murid Zalzal flew with Gharib towards his own country, the island of Camphor, and the castle of Crystal, and the land of the enchanted calf, so called because its king Al-Muzazzil had a pied calf, which he had clad in housings brocaded with red gold and worshipped as a god. One day the king and his people went into the calf, and found him trembling. So the king said, "O my God, what hath troubled thee?" Whereupon the Satan in the calf's belly cried out and said, "O Muzazzil, verily thy son hath deserted to the faith of Abraham the friend, at the hands of Gharib, lord of all Iraq," and went on to tell him all that had passed from first to last. When the king heard the words of his calf, he was confronted, and going forth, sat down upon his throne. Then he summoned his grandees, and came in a body, and he told him what he had heard from the idol, whereat they marveled and said, "What shall we do, O king?" Quoth he, "When my son cometh, and you see him, embrace him, and do ye lay hold of him." And they said, "Hearkening and obedience." After 2 days came Zazel and Gharib with the king's idol of Karaj, but no sooner had they entered the palace gate than the Jinn seized on them and carried them before Al-Muzazzil, who looked at his son with eyes of ire, and said to him, O dog of the Jann, hast thou left thy faith, and that of thy fathers and grandfathers? Quoth Suzzle, I have embraced the true faith, and on like wise do thou, woe be to thee. Seek salvation, and thou shalt be saved from the wrath of the King almighty in sway, creator of night and day. Therewith his father waxed wroth, and said, O son of adultery, dost confront me with these words? Then he bade clap him in prison, and turning to Gharib, said to him, O wretch of a mortal, how hast thou abused my son's wits, and seduced him from his faith? Quoth Gharib, Indeed, I have brought him out of wrongness into the way of righteousness, out of hell into heaven, and out of unfaith to the true faith. Whereupon the king cried out to the Murid, called Sayyar, saying, Take this dog, and cast him into the wadi of fire, that he may perish. Now this valley was in the waste quarter, and was thus named from the excess of its heats, and the flaming of its fires, which was so fierce that none who went down therein could live an hour, but was destroyed. But it was compassed about by mountains high, and slippery, wherein was no opening. So Sayyar took up Gharib, and flew with him towards the valley of fire, till he came within an hour's journey thereof, when, being weary, he alighted in a valley full of fruits, and trees, and streams, and setting down him upon his back, Gharib, chained as he was, fell asleep for fatigue. When Gharib heard him snore, he strove with his bonds till he burst them. Then taking up a heavy stone, he cast it down on the Murid's head, and crushed his bones so that he died on the spot. Then he fared on into the valley, and Shahrazad perceived the dawn of the day, and ceased her permitted say. And so do I cease my telling of this tale for today, till it be morrow.